I'm using it.
1, 2, 1, 2. This works. Let's use this for a minute here. Hello, everyone. Good evening. My name's Mark Iaconelli. I'm with the Hearth, where we work with real stories from regular folks to strengthen relationships, to heal from broken divisions, and to mobilize people for good. And I'm so excited that you're here tonight. I'm going to introduce Garreth in a minute here, but I want to just tell you a couple of things before we get started. Where are the restrooms? They're up here. So if you kind of make your way to the aisle on my left here, you can use the restroom if you need to tonight. Secondly, cell phones or anything that makes a noise, you guys could kind of silence them so we can all be present to the conversation tonight. Thirdly, the Hearth has a little training we do, if you're interested in the story, the Certificate in Community Storytelling, where we work on the power of story and how to apply that power within our families, our friendships, our communities, our workspaces. How can we use this power to connect and develop empathy? These little flyers are through this back exit way on the table in the back. Next announcement. He's remembering all of them. We have books for sale, and Garreth is going to talk about his book. You're going to want to get this book. For those of you who are streaming tonight, you can get Kindle, you can get the audio version, you can get the live version. Garreth, this is his own expense to drive down and be here. He was in Portland yesterday, and so when you purchase a book, you're also helping to support this event. So I hope you'll do that, and he'll talk more about the book. It's excellent. If you know Kathleen Norris, her work, she wrote a beautiful introduction to the book, and so I hope you'll stick around to talk to him about that in a little bit. So I first met Garreth at a thing called the Greenbelt Arts Festival in England. This is 20, 30,000 people come together, they camp out, and it's art and spirituality. And I got to have breakfast with Garreth and John O'Donohue, if you know the Irish poet, Irish philosopher. He was a mentor and good friend of Garreth's. And we got to have a breakfast together. And I don't know if you remember this, but we talked about the emotional life of God and how grateful we were that we were not camping with the other 20,000 people and that we were in a hotel, and how guilty we felt about that for talking about the spiritual life but wanting to be in a hotel. And it was a beautiful conversation with stories and laughter. And Garreth's one of these people who lives in the in-between, who lives in in-between spaces. Part of his time is in Ireland, part of his time is in the United States. He's got a PhD from Queen's College in Belfast, but he's not quite an academic, and he's not quite a man of the streets. He's kind of somewhere in between, right? He's an artist and an activist. He's a person with a deep spiritual life, but he has great sympathy for those people who find religion damaging and toxic. And he lives in these in-between spaces. And we need these ferrymen, these bridge builders who move in these in-between spaces. And one of the ways he's done that is festivals. If you know the Wild Goose Festival, he was the founding director of that. He's created the Movie and Meaning Festival, I hope I'm getting this right, conference, the New Story Festival, and one that I'll be coming to in North Carolina, where he lives in Asheville, the Porch Gathering. And he creates these spaces that are really a mirror of Garreth's inner life. You have beautiful people who are writers and painters and musicians and activists and people living new forms of human community, all coming together to try to figure out how do we live in this time. And so I'm very, very delighted that Garreth is here to talk about his book and really just to share his presence with you. Could you help give me a warm welcome? Ashland, welcome to Garreth Higgins.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Dan, and the community here. Thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight on a Sunday night. What a lovely introduction. We need other people at times to tell our story to us. Now, we can consent or not, we can agree or not, but it's really helpful to have, you mentioned mirrors, the mirror of someone who knows a bit about you, to tell you, this is what I see. And so that's lovely. My night is complete already. The Irish mystic, poet, philosopher, and gardener, John Moriarty, told a story about coming home one night on a night when the moon was so bright it was as if someone had painted it neon white. And when he got back to his house on the coast, it illuminated his path into the house. He didn't need a flashlight. And then when he got into the house, the moon was illuminating the living room through the window. He had to switch the light on to walk across the living room. And of course, when he switched the light on, the moon disappeared. So he switched the light off again, and lo and behold, the moon reappeared. And wanting to be sure that he was seeing what he thought he was seeing, he switched the light on one more time. No moon. So a final time he switched the light off and sat in the window of the living room of his house for, I think, several hours, until the wee hours of the morning, being illuminated by the moon and looking at the ocean and beginning to come to terms with something he hadn't thought before, and that was, there are some things you can only see in the dark. We live in times that have been called dark. I don't like that term for two reasons. The first is that it has racist connotations to suggest that dark means bad. So let's dispense with that, or at least use the term with caution. The second thing is, it's not even accurate to say that dark means bad. Dark just means you can't see anything. Rebecca Solnit quotes Virginia Woolf writing a letter in 1915, 1 year into the war that would become known as the Great War and then the First World War, in her letter saying, the future is dark. She did not mean the future is bad. She meant, I can't see the future. Now, join the club. Neither can any of us. It's always been true that you can't see round the next corner. And so when I say we live in dark times, that's what I mean. And it would be churlish not to admit that these times are troubled as well. But troubled can mean at least two things, too. One is it can mean pain, catastrophe, threat, sure. It can also mean troubled in the sense of troubling the waters. And I think many of us have experienced in the last few years that along with the other kind of trouble, these waters have needed to be troubled. Some waters are stagnant. New water needs to come in. I don't know what your story is. I don't know what you're carrying here tonight, and you don't know what I'm carrying either. I will assume each of us is facing a burden that's painful. And some of us are right in the middle of the eye of a hurricane. And some of us have had a really good day. And many of us are in the eye of a hurricane and having a good day at the same time. So whatever you've brought here, I'm not going to sugarcoat the trouble. And so when I talk about things that might help us transform our fear, not for a second am I trying to minimize real suffering and the size of it. What I'm trying to do is help us reframe it so that unnecessary suffering and fear that is not inevitable does not have to rule our lives. I could quote one line that Mark shared with me about 25 minutes ago from a young girl that he was speaking to today, who said the way to deal with fear is to think about something you love a lot, and then that will help you deal with the fear. That's kind of all I have to say this evening. But if you like my accent, who likes my accent? Okay, good. If you came to Ireland, we would like yours. If you like my accent and you want to hear some stories and some more complex ideas, I'd be delighted to share them with you, but nothing here is more profound than what I just said. That the way to deal with fear is to think about what you love. What you love will help you transform the way fear has power over your life. Something I once saw in the dark, a few years ago I woke up screaming and I was having a nightmare, and Brian, who I am privileged to share my life with, and Brian is also privileged to share their life with me, but in the moment, Brian was the one supporting me. Brian was shaking me because he could hear me screaming. I was having a nightmare. Now, I wear a CPAP mask to sleep, and I don't know if you've ever seen anybody wearing a CPAP screaming. It looks like a particularly disturbed Hannibal Lecter, and Hannibal Lecter was, let's face it, disturbed enough to begin with. He was waking me up because he could hear me scream, and I jolted out of the nightmare. My heart was thundering, and I heard Brian's voice say, "You're okay. You're okay. You have what you need." And then he rolled over and went straight back to sleep and didn't remember this the next day. It took me about an hour to regulate my breathing and calm down. The nightmare, which I won't tell you too much detail, you'll laugh at this. It is funny when I say it now. It was not funny at the time. But in the nightmare, a naked Alfred Hitchcock was chasing me down the street, getting ready to kill me. And it was just at the point where he was about to grab me that I woke up. And it was terrifying. I remember pondering this dream the next day and in the coming days and thinking, really, what Hitchcock represented there was the spirit of despair. A spirit of despair in our culture. A spirit of doom, collapse, it's over, there's nothing we can do to change things. The bad guys are always going to outrun us. Good news is the dream wasn't over, because sometime after this, I had the second part of the dream. And this was much more pleasant. It was an unusual dream in that there was nothing surreal about it at all. It was simply the dream of an actual memory. And the memory was of me being 11 years old, walking around Belfast with a little portable cassette player, listening to one of the most profound philosophical poems ever committed to song. And that is, of course, Huey Lewis and the News' The Power of Love. Don't take money, don't take fame, don't need no credit card to ride this train. It's strong and it's sudden, it can be cruel sometimes, but it might just save your life. That's the power of love. It really is actually quite a profound song. It tells the truth. Love is free, but it will cost you everything. If you give yourself to it, and then it will save your life. And I woke up from that dream with this amazing feeling in my body. I felt this sense of peace and calm in my chest. That was what I had felt in 1986 when I was listening to this song. And I realized the 11-year-old me who lost himself in fantasy in the movies, because I wasn't a terribly bullied child, and I wasn't completely isolated, but I wasn't popular, and I didn't do sports. And there was reason to be afraid in the Northern Ireland of my youth. Our society was deeply troubled. And the civil conflict that took the lives of nearly 4,000 people and directly physically injured 43,000 people and traumatized hundreds of thousands of people did come to the door of my house. And my parents suffered directly, and then myself and my siblings had the indirect experience of suffering through them. There was reason to be afraid. I lost myself in the movies, and I lost myself in this song, and I felt calm and peace in the story of this song and in the story of Back to the Future that the song was from. But when I was 42, which is 31 years later, I had a dream of the memory of this song, and the same feelings of calm and peace and well-being were still in my body. And I realized that the teaching that says the body keeps the score is true, but it isn't just the negative score. The body keeps the good scores as well. We just live in a culture that emphasizes the bad and the pain and the suffering and the spectacular cruelty of which human beings are capable. We don't emphasize the pleasant and the connecting and the healing and the kindness. But that's all inside us as well. The beautiful memories exist inside me just as much as the terrifying ones do. And good trauma therapy and good healing and good spiritual medicine, good community can help us unlock those. I benefited greatly from 3 years of trauma therapy that helped me get in touch with these positive feelings. It's no coincidence that I was in trauma therapy when I had the second dream. And if you're burdened tonight by traumatic memories, again, I don't know the detail of your story, but I've been around enough people with profound trauma to be able to say there is hope, actually. You may not feel it tonight, and it won't happen overnight, but there are ways that we've discerned how to help us heal so that the trauma story doesn't dominate us anymore. Here's one of the good memories. I was at a conference outside Dublin at a holiday center. You don't really have Irish holiday centers in the US. The closest thing to an Irish holiday center is like the family camps that are in the second season of The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. Some people know what I'm talking about. Like not particularly elegant places for families to have a cheap vacation, usually with a swimming pool and a water slide and a ballroom. We were there for a conference on reconciliation across lines of difference in Ireland, which exists between people who identify as Catholics and people who identify as Protestants, even if they're not religious labels. They're ethnic labels. You don't have to be a committed religious person to identify as a Protestant or as a Catholic in Ireland. It can sort of stand in for pro-British or pro-Irish. And we've had 800 years of division around this. And in the last generation, we've been moving toward collaboration, cooperation, and transforming our conflicts. We were having a conference, part of whose purpose was reconciliation on the island of Ireland. There were 3,000 people at this conference, and they all fit into this ballroom that had 3 sections of seating. If you added another section, and I was standing somewhere over here, you got one over here, one here, and one here. We were using this place because it was the biggest place available that you could get people to come for a residential gathering, probably on the island of Ireland, and it was also cheap because they opened it for us the week before their season began, which meant, unbeknownst to us, that the place had been decorated for the summer holiday season, which is not the same as being decorated for a conference on reconciliation between Protestants and Catholics on the island of Ireland. You came into this ballroom and were greeted by an enormous carved polystyrene mermaid holding a trident, which I don't know if, I've never known a mermaid to hold a trident. It wasn't a real mermaid. From anyone who's here from the mermaid rights activist groups, we are well aware you cannot take a mermaid out of the ocean for more than 6 hours. This was a polystyrene mermaid. Painted turquoise or aquamarine. I don't know the difference between turquoise and aquamarine. And there was a glitter ball hanging from the ceiling, which they forgot to switch off, presumably from the previous season. So we would be listening to serious talks about reconciliation with our faces dappled with aquamarine light. It was lovely. This particular night, the speaker got up to the lectern, much as I have done, and said, those of you who've heard me speak before are expecting a joke or two. I usually say something funny at the start of my talks because it builds some rapport with the audience. It breaks down barriers. I get used to the sound of my voice. And then we have a relationship, and I can tell you what I really want to talk about. Unbeknownst to us, this was actually the on-ramp for a joke. He then said, tonight's not a night for humor. What I have to say tonight is so serious, I cannot waste my time on jokes. The most sinful member of the church on the island of Ireland is present in the room with us tonight. And I know your name. You've caused so much agony. You've divided every community you've been a part of. You've broken families and you've harmed even the most innocent among us. And the only possible way that we can intervene with you and perhaps restrain you from your cruelty is if I publicly expose you tonight, the most sinful member of the church in Ireland. Now, where he was going with this was, it was a joke. The punchline was going to be the most sinful member of the church in Ireland is the human tongue, because in the King James Version of the Bible, and this will be probably the most religious part of this talk, there's people here from many different backgrounds. Don't worry, the talk is not a religious talk, if that's not your thing. And if it is your thing, you can pretend that because I read some Celtic poems that it was religious. I try to please everybody. The most sinful member of the church in Ireland is the tongue, because in the King James Version of the Bible, the tongue is referred to as an unruly member. And the idea would be he was then going to give a talk about the power of words to build up and tear down. That was his intention. He did not get to achieve this intention because what he had not banked on was that there were childcare facilities at this conference. And when you signed your child into the childcare facilities, you had to say where you were going to be. It was the days before mobile phones, so if your child needed you, they would just send a childcare volunteer into the room where you were and get you. If you were in one of the small seminar rooms, they would come right up to the front and interrupt the speaker. But if you were in the 3,000-seater Enchantment Under the Sea Mermaid Ballroom, they didn't want to interrupt the speaker. But if a child needed their parent, they would get a large piece of white cardboard, about that size, a tin of red paint, a paintbrush, I kid you not. They would paint the name of the parent whose attention they wanted to get, and they would send 2 ushers in who would hold up the piece of cardboard and walk around like this until they found the person whose attention they were trying to attract, because it would be less disruptive that way, right? The name of the most sinful member of the church in Ireland is, and at exactly that moment, in come 2 stewards carrying a piece of cardboard with somebody's name on it. She jumps from her seat like her feet are on industrial strength springs. I've never seen anybody run in midair before. Now, the good news is I saw her the next day. She was a member of our church, and I overheard her say she wasn't embarrassed. She was only ever concerned about her daughter, right? And I think that's actually something that's profoundly true. Catastrophe always calls forth love. People do courageous things in the face of catastrophe. We've heard stories about people who had superhuman strength and were able to lift a very heavy object off someone who was trapped underneath it. Many of these stories are true. Adrenaline courses through the body becomes capable of doing things it couldn't otherwise do. You usually don't hear the second part of those stories. This happened to a friend of mine in New Mexico who lifted a motorcycle that was too heavy to lift off his neighbor when it fell on him. And he was able to lift it, and then he was hospitalized because of, I guess, the muscles he had torn while doing this. So I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying it's one and done and everything's fine, but in the case of this person, she wasn't humiliated. She just cared about her daughter. The rest of us, sad to say, didn't much care about her daughter or her or anybody else because we started laughing so hard we couldn't breathe. 3,000 of us. There would be waves of laughter that would just fall. I mean, waves were appropriate. The mermaid actually started dancing. And then there would be a lull, and then somebody else would start laughing again, and it would erupt one more time. The guy who was speaking tried to sit down on the seat behind the lectern, but was laughing so hard that he missed the seat and fell onto the ground and just sat there and was hitting the ground, laughing, crying, happy. I don't need to exaggerate the story because I was there, I witnessed it, I participated in it. A few minutes went by until there was enough of a lull. He got back up, tried to begin his talk again, and started laughing so hard he couldn't breathe, and another wave hit the room one more time. He made one more attempt, Not just at finishing his talk, but at starting it. He hadn't even got to the opening joke. And it was to no avail, so the talk was abandoned for the night. Everybody happy. And the irony is, 28 years after this happened, I still remember the talk that he didn't give, which is that words have the power to build up and tear down. The stories we tell shape our lives. Human beings are the storytelling animal. We don't know of any other member of the animal kingdom that consciously tells stories. Although our late dog, Tupelo the Weimaraner, I think maybe knew something about trying to make me feel like she was sad. Maybe that's a story, or that she wanted some food or wanted to walk. But humans tell stories consciously, if we have learned to do that. But most of us haven't. We live in a culture that does not initiate us into becoming conscious of the stories we're telling. Most of us are unconsciously imbibing stories that have been given to us by family, school, work, media, any number of influences, but most of us never stop to think, what is the story I believe? What is the story I'm telling? Is this story true? Am I telling it in the most helpful way? Fear has a story element to it. We know from neuroscience and evolutionary biology that fear evolved in response to genuine threat. The example that's always used is that our prehistoric ancestors were chased by saber-toothed tigers. And one day, one of our prehistoric ancestors realized, here, when that saber-toothed tiger starts running toward me, I should get up and run away. Because probably the first time it happened, the cave person just stood there and was mauled by the saber-toothed tiger. And over time, we've evolved these little things in our brains called the amygdalae. You could call them fear receptors, and they are what flood your body with whatever your body gets flooded with when you're afraid. There's usually 3 responses that our bodies have. We run away, that's flight. We attack, that's fight. Or we're immobilized, that's freeze. Fight, flight, or freeze. And there are occasions when the amygdalae are telling us truthful information. Don't step too close to that cliff. Put your seatbelt on. Don't drive in the middle of that lane. Put on a mask when there's an airborne pandemic. That's not paranoia, it's wisdom. There's an ancient Middle Eastern teaching that says the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. Now, I grew up in a culture that portrayed God as this terrifying guy in the sky who loved me so much that he, and it was a he, that he would kill me if I didn't believe the right things. That's how much he loved me, right? So, yes, the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. I think it would be better interpreted as respect for reality is the beginning of wisdom. And fear, when it is married to wisdom, isn't paranoia, it's protection. It teaches us things. The problem is our brains have not evolved quickly enough to outpace the bombardment of story coming our way. I would say this happened even before electronic media and social media, and we were carrying around devices in our pockets upon which all written down human knowledge is available, and all written down human stupidity is also available. And there's nothing innate about this device. In fact, algorithmically, depending on who's sending the information, we're often being deliberately misled, but we don't even have to be deliberately misled. Unless you have developed wisdom and discernment in community with other people wiser than you, it's no wonder that these devices can frighten us, can make us feel there's a threat around every corner. The only way we're going to develop the kind of discernment to be able to tell the difference between necessary and protective fear on the one hand, and paranoia, propaganda, prejudice, or a waste of time on the other, is to learn a wiser story. And it's not rocket science. There's really just three questions. What is the story you believe? Is it the most true version of the story you can find? And are you telling it in the most helpful way? I'll give you an example from the world of statistics and economic inequality. By one measure, there are 700 million people on the planet today living in extreme poverty. 700 million is an unfathomable number. It's more than twice the population of the United States. Even if I devoted my life to ending extreme poverty worldwide and managed single-handedly to lift 699 million people out of extreme poverty, there'd still be 1 million left, and that would be 1 million too many. It's still a true story by this measure, 700 million people living in extreme poverty. But if I only tell the story that way, I'm likely to be left with a sense of disempowerment. How could I even begin to make a dent in that number? There's another way to tell the story, and that is 200 years ago, about 90% of the human population were living in extreme poverty by a similar measure to the one that I've just quoted. About 90% of the population. 700 million is less than 10% of the current global population. And so another way to tell the story is that for the last 200 years, there's been a precipitous decline in the percentage of human beings on the planet living in extreme poverty, from about 90% to less than 10%, which is a near 90% reduction in extreme poverty. Now, this is not of any use to the 10% who are living in extreme poverty. It is of use to those of us who are not living in extreme poverty, because then we can ask ourselves, I wonder what it was that people did that led to that reduction, and maybe I could do something similar. What have we learned? What was done that didn't work? What was done that made it worse? We then could also ask, is the measure telling us anything other than just extreme poverty? Is it telling us about people's well-being and health? It maybe isn't. So, you tell the story the second way, you have the potential liability of your audience thinking, wow, there's been a near 90% reduction in extreme poverty in 200 years. We just can sit back and watch it happen. We don't need to do anything. And that would be like, as someone has said, if you didn't know how to do laundry, going into a laundry room, seeing a lot of dirty laundry on the floor, going away, coming back 2 hours later, and seeing that the laundry had been washed and dried and pressed and piled up neatly, you would not say, oh wow, that laundry must have done itself. Now maybe you live with someone who thinks that that's how you act. But maybe you could approach that person and say, hey, could you teach me how to do laundry? I'd like to learn how to do laundry. I'd like to learn how I can contribute to reducing extreme poverty worldwide. And that's the third way of telling the story. The today story and the trend story and the what place I have in this story. It's not the truest or the most helpful, but it is a truer and a more helpful version of the story, which says either on the one hand, there's nothing I can do, or on the other hand, there's nothing I need to do. That's what I mean when I say getting clear about the story we're telling and asking what is a more true and a more helpful version, or the most true and the most helpful that I have available to me. There was a lot of fear in my life growing up